One of the most celebrated films coming out of the Sundance Film Festival this year was The Invisible War, a documentary that looks into the culture of rape and sexual assaults in the military. Here's a clip.
My commanding officer recommended me for the Marine Barracks Washington. I was excited. It was the tip of the spear as far as the Marine Corps is concerned.
She would stay at work late, and then she would drive home, and she'd call me, and she'd be on some kind of little high, and she'd talk about how she loved her job. She was this sweet person who was trying really hard and succeeding.
One of the first things I was told when I checked in was, don't wear any makeup because the Marines will all think that you want to sleep with them. And I thought, that's just ridiculous.
The atmosphere off the bat at Marine Barracks Washington was horrible. People asked me what sexual favors had I performed to get my orders there.
Okay, joining us on the set, the film's director, Kirby and producer, Amy Ziering, and Wes Moore back at the table as well. Good to have you on for this segment. Okay, this documentary has prompted some change, and we'll get to the news part of that. But let's talk about just how bad the situation was and what people didn't know about what was happening in our military. Amy, would you like to?
Sure. Well, one of the ways this issue's always been reported in the press is as just anomalous, aberrant situations, one-offs like Aberdeen,
go to trial,
or Tailhook, or these scandals that just seem sort of like, oh, a few bad soldiers here, and then we've taken care of the problem.
But what you're talking about is a culture.
Exactly.
Systemic, yes.
What our film does is it sort of connects the dots and shows that, no, this is chronic, it's ongoing, it's a systemic epidemic. That's a daily problem in our military.
So spell it out for us. What are we talking about? We heard it in the clips, but just as bluntly as you can, what are we talking about here?
Well, even according to the Department of Defense own estimates, 19,000 men and women were sexually assaulted within the U.S. military each of the last 2 years. And obviously over the last several decades, we're talking in the hundreds of thousands of men and women being assaulted.
We talk, Amy, about PTSD and suicide and unemployment among active duty and veterans a lot on this show, but this is a topic that hasn't come up, quite frankly, very often, and that's what you're trying to do with the film. What's the protocol right now inside the United States military in terms of dealing with a complaint about sexual assault?
John?
Sure. Generally, up until very recently, actually, the unit commander made the decision whether to investigate and prosecute a sexual assault. And that created all kinds of problems and potentials for conflict of interest. They might know the assailant, they might know the victim, they might have reasons not to want a sexual assault reported in their unit. So that has recently been changed, but up until just a few months ago, that's been the protocol, and as a result, many of these sexual assaults go unreported. In fact, most of the sexual assaults, less than 14% of the sexual assaults are actually reported. Again, this is DOD's own estimates.
Wes, I don't know if you want to join in at this part, but is it something that a woman who enlists needs to consider? When you look at these numbers, I'm sorry, but it sounds to me like you're talking about a culture, an epidemic, something that is prevalent, something that will probably in some way, shape, or form happen to you as a woman in the military. Am I wrong?
Well, statistics are 1 in 3, 1 in 5, or 2 in 5. So what we don't want is for people not to enlist. What we did want to make was a film that showed the best that the military can be and wants it to only improve. So it is something that everyone has to be aware of. We know the military can take care of. They've taken care of these problems if they've wanted to before. We've seen that. And so I feel bad. I understand we do want it to be on people's radar, but only so the military can take action to improve conditions for women and not to prevent them from
Do you have a
enlisting.
daughter, by any chance?
I do have a daughter.
If she wanted to go into the military, what would you say? How would you warn her about it?
Well, I'd hope that the military by that time, she's young, would have taken
precautions. What if she were
precautions.
enlisting right now? What would you say? How would you describe the situation? The risks that she would be putting herself in?
I'd say it's something she has to be very, very concerned about and aware of and be very careful of. But one thing I really do want to say is that every single woman I talked to was grateful for their service. And they said, Please don't make an anti-military film because I love the military. I'm only speaking out because I want it to be the best I can be, and I want my daughter to be able to enlist. Right now, it might not be a safe place for women, but I want it to be in a future because we know the military needs every good soldier, and it needs its women.
So what's the progress now that you've seen since the film has come out, and where are we going with this? Is the military taking it as seriously as you would hope?
We've been very heartened. It's been incredible. The response from the military has been extremely, extremely positive. In fact, Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta saw the film and 2 days later held a press conference to announce significant policy changes, which he himself said was a direct result of the impact the film had on him.
Well, and I tell you, and it's wonderful, to hear all the women that you interview saying that they're, thankful for their service, because honestly, we're very thankful for their service. And what's interesting, you talk about the statistics. Another stat that really jumped out at me is the fact that women have a female soldier, sailor, airman, Marine has a better chance of being physically and sexually assaulted than actually dying in combat. And so when we look at all these dynamics, we know that these past two wars have introduced a whole collection of new dynamics. They've introduced a collection of rapid and multiple deployments and op-tempo. They've also introduced that blurring line between male responsibilities and female responsibilities in the military has essentially been eviscerated. Women are doing all the different combat operations that all the men are doing. What are some of the big factors that we've seen? And again, there's never an excuse for sexual assault. But what are some of the big factors that we've seen in terms of why we've seen such a big jump in these kind of numbers? Or is it just being better reported now?
I don't think we've seen a jump. I mean, I think this has been going on for several decades. But I think it's not the culture per se. Most men in the military are horrified by this.
Yeah.
Most sexual assaults, whether in the civilian world or in the military, are committed by serial perpetrators, people who assault again and again. And this is what we're asking the Secretary of Defense and the Pentagon to do, is to go after these people and investigate, prosecute, and incarcerate them, put them away, go after them with the same will that they fight a war, because these are really enemies within. They're decimating the force from within. We lose thousands, tens of thousands of good soldiers each year after they've been assaulted. They leave the military.
Complicated question, but recruiting. Can anything change in recruiting? Because it seems, some would argue, that recruiting standards lowered significantly as we were trying to get men and women to serve in these endless wars in which they were having repeat tours of duty, and some even reported that they were lessening what the risk would be, that you would see the front lines along the way. There have been recruiting stories on every level that shows the standards are lowering. What about on this level?
Well, they did grant moral waivers for a time during the Iraq War, and that's changed somewhat. And I think the standards could be tighter. But I think, again, really what they need to do is they need to up their investigation, prosecution, and incarceration. That's what they really need to do at this point.
And take that out of the hands of the commanders.
Right.
Because there's too much.
And out of the chain of command.
Right.
And why this becomes so important is if a person violates that code and that trust while they're in uniform, they'll also do it when they're out of uniform.
Exactly.
We've got to stop this when we see it.
Right, exactly, because many of these serial perpetrators come out with honorable discharges, and everybody completely trusts them, in fact, and it makes it even worse for the rest of society.
The Invisible War will be in theaters in select cities on Friday. Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, thank you so much for your work and your contribution on this issue.
Thank you.